Hello. Today we're going to be covering a complete setup guide to record your podcast remotely through Zoom. And when we say Zoom, at least in this case, we're talking about the conference call app Zoom.us, not the Zoom H4, H6 recording hardware. So obviously with how things have been in the world the past year, 18 months, almost everyone is familiar with Zoom to take webinars, calls, business meetings, etc. And the need for recording podcasts remotely has obviously increased. People are doing recordings a little less frequently in person, and it also makes it more convenient to schedule with people. If you're not in a big metro area like New York, LA, Chicago, or something, obviously it's difficult and expensive to always ensure that you can record in person or book studio time or what have you. So doing this remotely just provides a lot more flexibility. Now, I've been recording podcasts through Zoom for a long time, and the complaint from myself and from others for a long time was that the quality through Zoom was not as good as it could be. So there's a few ways to fix that and ensure that you're getting a high quality recording through Zoom. No need to switch to an expensive platform like Riverside or Zencastr or any of those things. I think those services are good for what they provide, but if you're already using Zoom, if you already have a business plan on Zoom, so many people are just more familiar with the platform. It's easier for the guests to join the platform. If they're not like a well-versed podcaster, they at least know how to join a Zoom call. So it provides a lot more flexibility. So today we're going to cover a setup for recording through Zoom. Now, for this walkthrough, the microphone that I am using is the ATR 2100, and that is both an XLR and a USB microphone. So it is plugged in USB directly into my computer. Depending on what hardware you have, your setup might look slightly different. The foundation is that you have either a microphone or an audio interface that is plugged into your computer so that within Zoom you can change your audio and microphone settings to pick up your microphone. As long as your hardware does that and plugs into the computer, then you can follow this walkthrough even if you don't have the ATR. So the first thing that you want to do is open Zoom and create a new meeting with some parameters, whatever's more flexible for your recording schedule, and we're going to set a couple things here. So you can just name this whatever you want, podcast recording room. Ideally, you're going to be using this over and over again, so you can set this as a recurring meeting instead of specifying a date and time. Schedule for myself, you can leave blank. Meeting ID, generate automatically is fine. Passcode, if you want to set that, feel free. Waiting room, I do recommend using this. A lot of times we'll have a recording session where we do 3 or 4 recordings back to back. So the waiting room is important that way. If a guest joins the Zoom call early, they don't all of a sudden come into the room and interrupt the recording. You have the option to let people in one at a time. So I definitely recommend the waiting room. Video, I set this to off. We will usually turn video on at some point, but at least this way, the call doesn't start and all of a sudden the video is on and in your face. For audio, I set this to computer audio. Telephone gives them the option to call in through a cell phone, but again, if we're going to be recording these, the intent is for it to be a podcast recording, then computer audio is what we're going for. Calendar, you can select this based on whatever calendar you use. And let's see, under advanced options, allow participants to join anytime. That's totally up to you. Oftentimes, maybe they'll come in a few minutes early and they'll just kind of have a waiting screen while they wait for you to join. Mute participants upon entry. I leave that unchecked. It's kind of the opposite effect of the video setting up here. Sometimes people come in, they're muted, and they can't really figure out how to unmute themselves. So I leave that open. And automatically record meeting. So this depends. I have in the cloud set as a default setting for our business calls that we take. But for a recording session, I'm actually going to say no because you want to have some time at the beginning of the call before the actual interview starts. You guys might want to chit chat or whatever, and you don't necessarily have to record all of that. So I'm actually going to turn the automatic recording off. And then part of a checklist that we have for your recording sessions on Zoom is to double check that you are recording. So we'll leave that off, but just make sure that obviously when you're ready to go, that does happen in the meeting. Okay, and then you can click save. And Zoom will all of a sudden try to add that to your calendar. You can close that. You don't have to add it to your calendar. When that pops up, you can hit cancel and your meeting is still saved. Don't worry. So if I scroll down here, I see podcast recording room. So that's the one that we just set up. Okay, next thing is to check a couple settings in the Zoom preferences. So in the Zoom window, you can either click on your profile picture in the top right and click settings, or at the top taskbar in the Mac, you can click on Zoom and go to preferences. Those are the same thing. So just a few things to enable here. First, under audio, we're going to first do a mic check, and then we're going to enable a particular setting for recording. So speaker and microphone in most situations should be set to the ATR 2100 or whatever mic you're using. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to say ATR so that they're matching. So the ATR has a headphone jack in the microphone. So I'm speaking into the mic, and then the headphone sound is coming out of the microphone through the headphones. Depending on your setup, that might be slightly different. If you have the RODECaster, these should both be set to RODECaster Stereo. If you have the Focusrite, they should both be set to Focusrite Scarlett. Again, it kind of depends on your situation. But in most cases, you want these to be the same speaker and microphone if you have a microphone or audio interface set up. Okay. If your setting for automatically adjust microphone volume is checked, make sure you uncheck that. It's important to control the microphone input on your own. You can set that to whatever you want it to be. Suppress background noise. Now, I have mine set to auto because I do have a little bit of HVAC and fan sound in my office. If you're in a treated room or a quiet room, or some podcasters are recording like in their closet or something, you can turn this to low. If you're in a very noisy environment, you might turn that to high. Now, as I say this, there's a train going by outside, so you might be able to hear that in the background. So that kind of depends on your situation. But here, for recording quality audio on Zoom, is the most important setting. So here it says, show in meeting option to enable original sound. You want to check this and make sure that it's checked. So this is what turns off a little bit of the noise reduction and noise filtering on Zoom with your audio. And that's typically what causes when people think of lower quality audio through Zoom. A lot of that is solved by turning on original sound. So make sure this is checked. And then it has a few other options with it when you turn original sound on. I don't turn any of these on. Echo cancellation, I do not turn that on because I recommend that you always wear headphones when you're recording. So if you're wearing headphones, echo cancellation is redundant. It's trying to solve the problem of not having headphones. So definitely wear headphones when you record, and you can leave this unchecked. And same thing with music and with stereo audio. There's no need to enable any of those. The important part is up here, just to show that meeting option is enabled. Okay. Next is under the recording tab on the side. And there are two other important options for recording on Zoom. They're right here. Record a separate audio file for each participant, and optimize for third-party video editor. So make sure both of these are checked. You might not be doing your podcast on video, but it's safe to just have this checked anyways. Optimize for third-party video editor ensures that Zoom is recording in a constant frame rate instead of a variable frame rate, which if you are doing video and for some reason you need to sync or resync your audio and video in post-production, if it has a variable frame rate, it's going to cause you a ton of headache with being out of sync from the audio track. So click this and then make sure that it is optimized. It will give you that constant frame rate and just make your life a lot easier. I would just check it regardless of if you're doing video or not. And record a separate audio file. That's self-explanatory. That means everyone that's on the call is going to have their own audio tracks that you can mix those separately in post-production, which is exactly what we want. The only other thing that I would say to take a look at is where your recordings get saved once the call is over. I just have mine going to the desktop. Once the session's done, I will upload those to Drive or put them on my external hard drive and then take it off of the desktop. It's just easier and more visible for me, but feel free to click here and change the recording location for your calls. Okay, now let's start up a room, and we'll show you a couple options here in the actual Zoom meeting window. So I'll make this full screen. First thing is up at the top left, there's a button here. You probably haven't seen this, but now that we've enabled that setting for original sound, there's a small button here that says original sound on. So mine's turned on because I've done this before. There's also a little drop down arrow next to this. If you click that, it will ask you select a microphone to always use original sound. So I've set my ATR to anytime I connect to a Zoom call, if I'm using the ATR, it's using original sound. It's enabled by default. So I would recommend that whatever you're using right now to record, just go ahead and check this to always use original sound. If you don't, just be aware up here in this button, you can toggle this on and off. So you probably can't hear a difference right now because I'm recording this voiceover on a separate piece of hardware. But if this says off, original sound is off, click original sound is on. So just be aware of that before you start recording. Now, in many instances, you can ask your guest to do the same thing. I would say this depends on one factor. If they have a microphone, I would recommend that they also turn on original sound. So you can, they will have to enable that setting. So you'll have to walk them through the steps that we just went through. Please open your Zoom settings, go to the audio tab, and click the button that says in meeting option to enable original sound. So it's a few extra steps, but if they have a microphone, maybe they're a podcaster and they don't usually use Zoom, if they have a mic, it's worth doing just to get a higher quality recording on their end. The other part of that scenario is if they don't have a mic. Now, this is probably the majority of your guests do not have a microphone, and that's totally fine. We tell podcasters, if you have the flexibility and the budget, it's really great for you to mail a microphone to your guest. Make sure it arrives a week before your recording session is going to happen, and make sure you get on your Zoom call for the recording 15 to 30 minutes early to help them set the mic up, put on their headphones, enable original sound, and then join the call. Not everyone has that flexibility, obviously. That is, not every podcaster is doing that. So we go into a lot of remote podcast recordings expecting the guest on the other line to not have a microphone, and that's totally fine. The one thing that we do ask is that they use headphones. We really don't recommend Bluetooth headphones, but if they have a wired pair of Apple earbuds or some other pair of headphones, even if they're recording through their built-in laptop mic, putting those headphones on is going to make a big difference in the recording and just make your life easier in post-production when it comes time to edit. So when you jump into the meeting, turn original sound on, your guest will join. If they have a mic, you can walk them through the steps of turning original sound on. If they don't, just ask that they put their headphones on, make sure they're in a quiet room. And these are things that you can also prepare for ahead of time. We have a checklist on things that you can inform your guest of before the recording time rolls around. And I'll link that below so you can get that checklist. And it's just a couple reminders you can send it to them ahead of the recording just to kind of speed things along, make them aware of that. The next thing that you would want to do is just double, and this is really even triple checking that you have the right audio selected. So we just changed our microphone and speaker settings in the main Zoom menu, but you can also do this in meeting. If you look at the mute and video buttons, there's a little arrow next to the mute icon. Click that and you're able to change your microphone and your speaker settings. So sometimes if you're unplugging and plugging your mic back in, Zoom might default to your built-in microphone, like the MacBook Pro microphone. So just double check that this is happening. If you are using video, the same thing would apply there. You can click the arrow and just make sure that the correct webcam is selected. And once those things are done, it's time to record. Now, there's two ways that you can record on Zoom. One is in the cloud, and one is on the computer. Now, this is where things get a little confusing, but we've done some A/B testing on this, and we've gotten what we think is a solid system to do this. So, click record, and it will ask you if you want to record in the computer or in the cloud. If you're an audio-only podcast, always record to the computer. So we enabled the option to record a separate audio track for each person that's on the call. When you record to the computer, Zoom will give you audio in a multi-track recording. So you'll have one file for each person that was on the call, as well as one audio file for the entire call with everybody joined. If you record to the cloud, you do not get those multi-track files in audio. And to make things more confusing, let's say you record with the video in gallery view setting. If you record to the cloud, Zoom will actually give you a speaker view and a gallery view option. You'll have two different types of videos to choose from. But if you record to the computer, it only gives you the video option that you actually have selected and are viewing during the meeting. So I realize that's confusing. So recording to the computer will give you multi-track audio. Recording to the cloud will give you multi-track video. You cannot do both on the same system, which I realize is kind of annoying. I'm assuming most podcasters that are listening to this are audio only, so you can record to the computer and not have to worry about anything else. If you prefer to record video on Zoom in gallery view, that would mean you and the guest camera are on screen at the same time. You can see both of you at the same time. Then I would say you can still record to the computer and get that one video file and be totally fine. If you want the extra flexibility of recording in a few different formats of video, then what I would say is have an assistant or somebody join the Zoom call with you and give them permission to record the meeting and have them record to the cloud and you record to the computer. That way you'll basically have two recordings of the same session, and then you have all the files that you need in order to make those work. All right. So once you're recording, you go through and do the interview or the recording or the conversation or the session as you will, and go ahead and stop recording. And that's really it. Everything else that happens in meeting is all standard Zoom controls that if you've been on Zoom calls before, I'm sure you're familiar with. The important part here really is all of the things that we enabled before the session actually begins, just to give you a higher quality result. So before I show you one alternative to this setup, let's look at what these Zoom files actually look like. I'm going to end this call. And since I was the only one on that, I'm actually going to open up a different session just to show you what the files look like when the session is over with. So here is a session that we did earlier today. Zoom will create this with the date, the time, the name of the room, and then the meeting ID here. That's how these folders are going to be labeled for the recordings, just FYI. So if we click into here, we'll see a couple things. We actually recorded twice in this one meeting. Once was the intro to the podcast, and then once was the interview itself. So we see two different audio files, and this is the entire meeting with both host and guest on the same track. And then we have a video file here. And since I did not record to the cloud, this is just one video file per recording, and this is in gallery view. And then we also have a folder called audio record, and within here is where you'll see your multi-track files. So Gravity was me. I was on the session just recording. I wasn't participating. And then we have Vicky, who is the guest, and Brett, who is the host. And then here for the intro that we recorded was, again, me just running the session, and then Brett as the host. So that's what those files look like when they're packaged up. And just to show an example, let's say you were only to do, again, I had two recordings within this one session. Let's say we just did one. This is what your folder would look like. One file for each participant, one file for the entire track, and then one video file. This is recording to the computer, remember. I'll put those back. Close. All right, so there's one alternative to this. So recording audio on Zoom, it does not record in 44.1K. That's the sample rate, which means it is slightly, it will sound slightly compressed, and it does not have as much musical information in the file as something that you would record through a video camera or through your audio interface, like through Pro Tools or Logic or something. It's a lower sample rate, which means it's going to be slightly less quality. Now, I would say for 90% of people that are listening, if you enable that original sound setting, only you are really going to notice the difference between recording like directly into Logic or GarageBand versus recording into Zoom. So just keep that in mind. Just save yourself some hassle by enabling original sound in Zoom and just keeping everything on one platform. It just makes for a simpler setup. But if you want one workaround, on the Mac, there's an app called QuickTime. So you can just open up QuickTime Player. And if you're using a Windows, I believe there is an app called Voice Recorder or Voice Memos that does the same, pretty much the same functionality. So with QuickTime open, you can go to File, and you can click New Audio Recording. And you have the option here next to the Record button. Click this little arrow, and you can select which audio source you're using to record this. So a lot of times what I'll do, so what we used to do actually before original sound was an option on Zoom, was to open QuickTime and record on QuickTime and on Zoom at the same time, and we would sync those files up in post. So essentially we would start our Zoom call. I would start recording here to the computer. I would go back to QuickTime. I would start recording here. And I would let these both run simultaneously during the session. And then once the session's over, stop both of these. And then we would sync those up in post-production. And we'll cover that in a separate video. But this does give you an alternative if you maybe you want to back up just to be safe. Maybe you've tested out original sound on Zoom and you think it still doesn't sound quite as good. Recording quickly through QuickTime like this is a really good alternative just to have that running in the background while you're on a Zoom call. Now, again, I'm using a single microphone plugged in USB to the Mac. That makes it simpler on QuickTime. If you have the RODECaster, that can obviously record on its own simultaneously with Zoom. If you have something like the Focusrite Scarlett, if you have multiple tracks, let's say you have a co-host that are sitting next to each other, and then you're also calling someone in on Zoom, that'd be a situation where QuickTime would not work, and you would want to open up a program like Logic or Pro Tools or Audition and record in there along with on the Zoom call running in the background. So a lot of settings there. Again, check the link below in the description for a checklist on all the things, the settings that you want to enable, and a couple reminders for you and for your guest before you start recording. Once you get a room set up and you have your settings dialed in on Zoom, it really is as simple as starting the call, checking your microphone input, turning on original sound, and hitting record. And it's really that easy. So drop a comment if you have questions on this setup. If you found an alternate way to record on Zoom, or maybe you found a different call app that you think handles podcast recording better than Zoom, I would love to hear. We've tested out a bunch, and for many reasons have just decided to stick with Zoom for ease of use. So there are always trade-offs when recording remotely over the internet. So would love to hear what you guys are using to record your podcast, though. So let us know. And as always, if you have questions, please comment. We'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. So thanks for watching.